I was running through the terminal like a woman possessed, heels clacking on marble, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the announcements echoing overhead. My flight to London was boarding in 20 minutes, and I'd already gone through security twice after realizing I'd left my charger in the car. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I could breathe once I was seated with a glass of wine and my presentation slides open. But when I reached for my passport in my tote, my fingers met nothing but a thin folder and lip gloss. For a moment, I froze. I checked again, then again, digging through papers, receipts, and old boarding passes like a madwoman. My stomach dropped. The passport wasn't there. I felt the color drain from my face as I whispered, "No, no, no." I was certain I'd packed it this morning. I remembered setting it next to my coffee mug while answering emails. I called my husband immediately. He was supposed to be home today, taking the morning off before his board meeting. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I texted him, "Hey, can you check the kitchen counter? I think I left my passport there." No reply. I called the house line, straight to the answering machine. I remember standing there at the gate, watching people roll their suitcases past me, their lives moving forward while mine stalled in a moment of helpless irritation. I'd never missed a flight in my life. I prided myself on being composed, efficient, the kind of woman who didn't make careless mistakes. But there I was, suitcase in hand, realizing I couldn't go anywhere without that small blue book. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. The next flight was in 3 hours. I'd drive home, grab the passport, maybe even have time for coffee before heading back. Still, something about the silence on the other end of those calls unsettled me. My husband, Adam, was usually the type to answer immediately, especially when I was traveling. But today, nothing. The drive back felt longer than usual. The city looked washed out in the morning haze, like it hadn't fully woken up yet. I tried to shake off the unease, reminding myself that Adam might be in the shower, or maybe he'd gone out for a quick run. The rational explanations came easily, but they didn't quiet the small voice in my chest whispering that something was off. As I turned into our neighborhood, the familiar row of manicured lawns and tall gates brought a sense of control back, our world of order and stability. We'd built everything from the ground up, the house, the business, the image. From the outside, we were the picture of success. Inside, I told myself, was the man who'd stood by me through lean years, through heartbreak, through dreams that finally came true. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Adam's car parked crookedly near the steps. Odd. He was meticulous, almost obsessive about alignment. I smiled at the thought. He must have been distracted. The front door was unlocked, another small detail that tugged at my nerves. Still, I brushed it off. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet for a weekday morning. No sound from the TV, no faint hum from the espresso machine he always used, just sunlight filtering through the tall windows and the echo of my own heels against marble. I called out, "Adam? You home?" My voice sounded louder than I expected. No answer. I checked the kitchen counter, papers, keys, and his watch. My passport wasn't there. I frowned, scanning the room. Maybe I'd left it upstairs on the dresser when I was packing. I climbed the staircase slowly, still calling his name, still pretending everything was normal. Halfway up, I paused. A faint sound drifted down the hallway. Music, soft and low. Piano notes. Something about it didn't fit. Adam never played music this early. My hand tightened on the railing as I listened again. Then I heard it. Laughter. A woman's laughter. Light, familiar, cutting through the quiet like glass. My breath caught. I stood frozen, pulse racing, every rational explanation collapsing at once. In that suspended moment, the passport didn't matter anymore. The flight, the meeting, the rush, all of it dissolved into the sound of that laugh echoing from upstairs. I remember thinking, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's someone from work. Maybe it's harmless. But a deeper part of me already knew. I took a step forward, then another. The house I thought I knew suddenly felt foreign, its walls listening, its silence waiting. I thought I was coming home to grab what I'd forgotten. I had no idea I was about to lose everything I thought I remembered. The closer I got to the front door, the heavier the air seemed to grow. Our mansion had never felt intimidating to me before. I'd always loved its quiet elegance, the tall glass panels, the echo of my heels against the marble foyer. But that morning, something about it felt wrong. The stillness wasn't peaceful. It was staged, like I'd walked into a paused movie, where everyone had just vanished mid-scene. Outside, the driveway looked full, too full. Adam's car was parked crookedly. The maid's small white hatchback was tucked to the side. And then there was a third one, sleek and unfamiliar, black paint glinting in the sun. It wasn't one of our friends' cars, and I didn't recognize the plate. For a second, I told myself it must belong to a contractor. Maybe the gardener had finally shown up, or one of the interior designers Adam had been talking about for weeks. It made sense, on paper anyway, but it didn't feel right. As I pushed open the front door, a faint draft of cold air brushed against my face. The scent of Adam's cologne still lingered, mixed with something sweeter, perfume. I couldn't place it. The housekeeper usually lit citrus candles, not something floral. I called out, "Adam?" No answer. I tried again, louder this time. "Maria." Nothing. The silence pressed in from every direction, so thick I could hear my own breathing. I moved through the foyer, noticing little details that felt slightly off. The throw pillows on the couch were misaligned. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the side table beside a lipstick-stained napkin. My brain instantly began rearranging the story into something logical. Maybe Maria was entertaining a guest while cleaning. Maybe Adam had called someone over for a quick meeting. I wanted to believe that. I needed to, then I noticed the faintest thread of music. It floated from upstairs, soft and haunting. The kind of piano melody you'd hear in a luxury commercial, elegant but hollow. Adam never listened to music like that. His mornings were usually filled with news podcasts or work calls. Never this. I followed the sound without realizing it, drawn up the staircase one careful step at a time. The higher I climbed, the clearer the details became. The soft rhythm of footsteps, a low murmur, a voice, male, familiar, Adam's. Then laughter, light, feminine. It wasn't Maria's. I knew that instantly. This laugh was younger, lilting, like someone who had never had to be cautious in her life. I froze halfway up, my hand clutching the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct told me to stop, to turn back, to let logic win. But curiosity, or maybe denial, that kept me rooted. My mind tried to fill the silence with reason. Maybe a client had stopped by. Maybe they were reviewing something upstairs. Maybe. Always maybe. The sun shifted through the skylight, spilling across the hallway. It illuminated the dust motes floating lazily in the air, like the house itself had been holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like minutes, listening, waiting for some proof that I was overreacting. But instead, the laughter returned, louder this time, closer, and then a whisper I couldn't quite make out, followed by the creak of floorboards. That was when the truth began to sink in. Not in words, but in the way my body reacted. The tightening of my chest, the faint ringing in my ears, the weight of knowing without seeing, the unfamiliar car, the perfume, the silence. It all started to fit together, like puzzle pieces forming an image I didn't want to recognize. The house I had called home suddenly felt foreign. A stage where something intimate and ugly was unfolding behind closed doors. And yet part of me still clung to the hope that I was wrong, that if I walked upstairs and opened that door, Adam would look up, surprised, maybe even amused, and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew. I just hadn't seen it yet. At first, it was just a murmur, a low hum, muffled by the thick walls and the air between us. Then came that sound, his laughter. Not just any laugh, but the one I'd memorized over the years. The one that had once melted every wall I had built around myself. Adam's laugh always started with a short breath through his nose, followed by that rich, warm chuckle that used to make me feel safe. But hearing it then, drifting down the hallway of our mansion, it sounded foreign, almost cruel. I stopped mid-step, my hand frozen on the banister. The sound was coming from our bedroom. My chest tightened and I tried to rationalize it. Again. Maybe he was on a call. Maybe someone from work had come by. Maybe. My brain clung to every fragile excuse like a drowning person reaching for driftwood. But then came another sound, softer, lighter, a woman's voice. It was faint at first, just a giggle, the kind that dances at the edge of flirtation. My stomach dropped before my mind could even process it. I knew that voice. I knew it before I allowed myself to name it. No, I told myself. No, it couldn't be. I crept closer, my heels silent against the carpeted hallway. Every step felt like walking through fog, slow, uncertain, but inevitable. The faint scent of vanilla and jasmine grew stronger the closer I got. That was the perfume she always wore. It had filled my living room the day she showed me fabric swatches for our curtains. She'd said, "Warm notes make a house feel alive." I'd smiled then, thinking she was poetic. Now the same scent made my skin crawl. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough to let a sliver of light cut through the dim hallway. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. I didn't want to look. Every part of me screamed not to, but I did, because not knowing would have been worse. Through that narrow opening, I saw them. Adam was standing near the window, shirt half buttoned, his back to me. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, my bed, wearing his shirt. My best friend, Lila. The woman I'd trusted with everything from my design choices to my insecurities. The woman who'd once told me, "You're so lucky to have him." They looked so comfortable, so unbothered, like this was normal, like this was theirs. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, smiling that soft, practiced smile he used to give me when I'd say something nervous or clumsy. My throat tightened. The air seemed to thicken until breathing became work. I didn't gasp. I didn't make a sound. I didn't even cry, not yet. I just stood there, watching through that sliver of light, feeling the world inside me begin to tilt. My first thought wasn't anger. It was humiliation, that sharp, cold kind that burns from the inside out. Every dinner conversation, every late night at work, every time he'd brushed off my doubts with a kiss on the forehead. It all rearranged itself into a cruel pattern I should have seen sooner. Lila's laughter faded into a sigh, and she leaned against him. I stepped back before I could see more. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the way my mind refused to hold the image steady. I walked backward down the hallway, quiet as a ghost, terrified the floorboards would creak. When I reached the landing, I paused. My reflection stared back at me from the glass railing. A stranger. Pale. Hollow. I waited for the wave. The explosion. The screaming. The instinct to burst into that room and demand answers. But it didn't come. There was only silence. A deep, ringing silence that settled into my bones. I realized, with a kind of detached clarity, that I didn't want to hear their explanations. I didn't want to be the woman begging for honesty from two people who had already given her their truth in whispers and laughter. Downstairs, the faint echo of the piano music still played, that same haunting melody that had led me here. It felt almost mocking now. I turned toward the staircase, my mind empty and loud at the same time. My hand brushed against the wall, grounding me in the physical world. I didn't know what I'd do next. I only knew that something inside me had quietly died in that hallway, and that the silence I carried with me was louder than any scream could ever be. I didn't remember walking out of the house. One moment I was staring at the light under the bedroom door, and the next, I was standing in the driveway, the cold air biting at my skin. My keys were already in my hand. I got in the car, turned the engine on, and drove. I didn't think about where I was going. My body just moved. Every breath felt heavy, mechanical, like my lungs had forgotten what they were for. I reached the airport again before realizing it. The place that had started this spiral. I parked in the farthest corner of the lot and turned off the engine. Then I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding, but in that muted way. Not loud enough to be dramatic, just enough to remind me I was still alive. I didn't cry, not then, not yet. The silence inside the car felt enormous. I stared straight ahead at the empty tarmac beyond the fences, watching planes lift into the gray morning sky. Hundreds of people going somewhere, living, moving forward. And there I was, frozen in place, with a secret too sharp to touch. I tried to imagine what Adam was doing at that very moment. Laughing. Maybe pouring another glass of wine. Maybe holding her. The thought didn't even sting. It just hollowed me out. Then the memories started playing on a loop, uninvited. The first time I met him, he'd been broke, charming, full of grand ideas and borrowed confidence. I was working 2 jobs back then, trying to keep my small marketing firm afloat. He had dreams but no direction. I believed in him when no one else did. I remember paying for his first business course, helping him write his first proposal. "You're my lucky charm," he used to say. When his company finally took off, we celebrated with cheap champagne in our old apartment. We promised each other we'd never let success change us. We'd stay grounded, loyal. He'd kiss my forehead and whisper, "You made this possible." And I believed him. Every word. When we started building the mansion, it was supposed to be our symbol of love, of hard work, of making it together. I spent nights going through design catalogs, coordinating contractors, arguing over budgets. He was too busy for the details, so I handled them all. That was how I met Lila, my friend. I'd brought her in to design our dream home, not knowing she'd later use it as a stage for betrayal. I remembered the first time she walked through the door with her samples. Adam had looked at her work, impressed. "She's got vision," he'd said, and I'd smiled, proud to have introduced someone talented into our lives. The irony now made my stomach twist. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. I wasn't just grieving a husband. I was grieving the version of myself that had built a life on trust, the woman who believed loyalty was enough to earn the same in return. It wasn't the cheating alone that broke me. It was the erasure, the quiet replacement, the realization that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being seen. In that parking lot, surrounded by strangers coming and going, I felt invisible. Cars pulled in, engines started, people laughed on their phones, hugged their loved ones goodbye. And I sat there, suspended in stillness. The world kept moving, indifferent. I thought about my old career, the one I'd put on hold for Adam. "Just until things stabilize," he'd said. "You're better at home managing things." I had agreed, thinking love meant sacrifice. That partnership meant compromise. But the more I gave, the smaller I became, until I wasn't even sure where I ended and he began. A plane roared overhead, shaking the car slightly. I looked up, following it until it disappeared into the clouds. A strange calm settled over me then, the kind that comes when you've hit the deepest point of quiet despair. I whispered to no one, "I'm done." I didn't mean done with him, not yet. I meant done pretending, done being the woman who always absorbed the pain and smiled anyway. For hours I just sat there, staring at nothing, breathing through the ache. My phone buzzed twice, his name on the screen, but I didn't answer. The silence between us had already said everything. As the afternoon light shifted to gold, I finally turned the ignition and began to drive. Not home, not to him, just somewhere, anywhere that didn't smell like betrayal. Somewhere I could start remembering how to exist outside the ruins of what we built together. People always assume revenge starts with anger, but mine began with silence. The kind that hums beneath the skin, steady, focused, alive. After that morning, I didn't confront him. I didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't demand answers. I smiled. I laughed when he laughed. I even kissed him goodnight. It wasn't forgiveness. It was performance. I told myself I was mourning. Not him, but the version of myself who had loved him so blindly. That woman had died in that hallway. What remained was her ghost. Graceful, deliberate, composed. I buried her beneath calm smiles and well-rehearsed gestures. It was easier to play the role of the perfect wife than to explain the corpse of trust rotting quietly between us. Every morning, I woke before him, brewed his coffee, packed his briefcase. He didn't notice the difference, the slight detachment in my voice, the way I avoided looking at him too long. If he did, he dismissed it as stress or fatigue. Adam had always been good at seeing only what made him comfortable. But I was watching learning, collecting. I began by revisiting our shared documents, the ones he used to insist I didn't need to worry about. "It's all under control," he'd said countless times, signing things without ever explaining. But I had my own copies, tucked away in old folders, protected by the meticulousness he used to tease me for. "You're such a planner," he'd say. He had no idea how right he was. At night, while he slept beside me, his phone face down, his breathing steady, I'd quietly email myself photos of paperwork, receipts, contracts. Nothing dramatic, just slow, deliberate gathering. I learned where the money really went, what accounts existed outside our shared ones, and how many business expenses were actually gifts to her. Jewelry, travel, hotel stays billed under his company name. He'd even paid her consulting fees through a dummy vendor. Each discovery tightened something inside me, not rage, but precision. I began keeping a small notebook hidden in the lining of an old purse, jotting down details, dates, amounts, names. Every note was another nail in the coffin of the perfect wife he thought he still had. Meanwhile, I played my role flawlessly. Dinner parties, work events. I wore the same perfume she'd once given me, smiled at his colleagues, and laughed in all the right places. People said we were the couple everyone admired. I let them. I even hosted Lila once, pretending not to notice the flicker of guilt that crossed her face when she looked at me. I simply poured her wine and said, "You've made this house so beautiful." She nearly choked on her drink. I started seeing details differently after that. The small patterns of his lies. How he always turned his phone slightly away when replying to a message. How his tone softened when saying her name in casual conversation. How he'd avoid eye contact when talking about work trips. None of it surprised me anymore. It only fed the quiet calculation unfolding in my mind. I hired a financial advisor under the pretense of planning future investments. I used a different email, a different name, and a friend's address for correspondence. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much of our wealth was really mine. I had built the foundation. My marketing strategies had helped launch his first deals. My contacts had opened his doors. He'd simply expanded the empire I started, and then handed its spoils to her. So I started moving things. Slowly, subtly. I transferred shares, rewrote access rights, recovered old contracts he'd forgotten existed, the ones that gave me ownership over assets in my name, for convenience. He hadn't noticed when I'd signed them. He'd just been eager to close deals, to make things official. His arrogance had always been my best camouflage. Weeks passed. He grew more careless, more convinced of his invincibility. I pretended to believe it too. To anyone watching, we looked picture perfect. But in my head, I'd already started writing her eulogy. Not hers by name, but the symbolic one. The perfect wife's funeral. Every lie he told me was another flower on her grave. Every fake smile I gave him was another handful of dirt. I played my part with grace, and he mistook it for love. He didn't see the quiet shift in my eyes when he called me "Darling." He didn't realize the woman sitting beside him at dinner was gone, replaced by someone patient, enough to wait for the right moment. I wasn't planning an outburst. I was building an exit, a clean surgical one that would leave him without the money, the image, or the comfort he used to replace me. And when it happened, he wouldn't even understand how. By the time I went to bed each night, the act of pretending no longer hurt. It became a kind of armor, cold, efficient, necessary. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't ache. I was past grief, past rage. What was left was purpose. And purpose, I learned, can be the sharpest form of revenge. Adam's birthday had always been an event. Tailored suits, curated guest lists, and the illusion of effortless success. This year was no different. The dining hall glittered with candlelight, laughter, and polished glass. Everyone who mattered was there. Clients, investors, friends who pretended to care. And her. Lila. She stood near the bar, wearing red. Of course she did. She looked radiant, almost glowing under the dim chandeliers. I caught her glance once, brief, nervous, then quickly masked with a smile. I returned it calmly, the way a surgeon might look at a patient before picking up the scalpel. Adam moved through the crowd like he owned it, confident, magnetic, shaking hands and slapping shoulders. He was in his element, the man who'd built himself from nothing, the story everyone loved to repeat. I watched him laugh, his arm brushing hers once, lightly, almost by accident. He didn't notice that I saw. When dinner was served, I took my place beside him, the devoted wife, radiant in black silk. Lila sat 2 seats away, introduced, with nauseating ease, as a brilliant design consultant who's been a huge help lately. I smiled and raised my glass to her. She certainly has a talent for transforming spaces, I said, my tone even. Adam shifted in his seat, the first small crack in his confidence. After dessert, it was time for the gifts. His friends handed him the usual: wine, art, expensive gadgets. Then came mine, a black box tied with a silver ribbon. I placed it gently in front of him, meeting his eyes. "Happy birthday, darling," he smiled, a little too wide, as if expecting extravagance. "What have you done this time?" "Something personal," I said softly. He opened the lid. Inside, cushioned in velvet, was a luxury watch, sleek, limited edition, engraved discreetly with his initials. His expression brightened, but then he noticed the thin envelope resting beneath it. His hand hesitated. "What's this?" "A reminder," I said. He slid out the small, faded photograph. It was of us, years ago, before the mansion, before the money. We were standing outside our first apartment, covered in paint, holding takeout boxes, laughing like fools. I remembered that day vividly. We'd just finished repainting the walls ourselves because we couldn't afford to hire anyone. The photo captured something pure, something long gone. The table grew quiet. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed to pause. Adam stared at the picture, his jaw tightening. "You kept this?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Of course," I said. "It's easy to forget where we started. I thought you might want a reminder." Lila shifted slightly in her chair, pretending to sip her wine. She didn't look at me. Adam laughed awkwardly, forcing a grin for the table. "You're always so sentimental," he said, sliding the photo back into the box. But his hand trembled just enough for me to notice. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Funny, isn't it? How time changes people," his smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I just smiled. Just that some things are priceless, and some people forget that. The guests resumed their chatter, oblivious to the invisible storm gathering across the table. Adam avoided my gaze for the rest of the evening. He laughed too loudly at jokes, refilled his glass too often, and kept glancing at Lila with growing discomfort. The photo sat untouched beside the watch, an artifact of guilt, framed in velvet and silence. When the party ended, people hugged us goodbye, showered him with praise, and left with the shallow warmth of people who adored his success. Lila lingered by the door, unsure whether to wait for him or leave first. I approached her, calm and polite. "Thank you for coming, Lila. The room looked stunning tonight." She stammered a thank you, eyes darting to Adam, then back to me. For a second I thought she might apologize, but instead, she smiled tightly and said, "You have a beautiful life." I held her gaze and replied, "I used to." That night, as Adam placed the box on his dresser, I caught him looking at the photograph again. His face softened, then hardened. Guilt, that's what it looked like. The first sign that he was beginning to feel the weight of what he'd done. He didn't notice that while he slept later, I quietly removed the watch and the photo from the box. The real gift had already been delivered. The performance was over. The countdown had begun. It was a gray morning, the kind that smelled like wet concrete and burnt coffee. I chose a small cafe off Maple Street, the kind of place where no one noticed anyone else. My lawyer, Daniel, was already there, sitting in the corner by the window with his usual black notebook open, a half-drunk espresso beside it. He'd been with my family's firm for years, discreet, methodical, unshakably calm. The perfect man to help dismantle a life without drawing blood. He looked up as I slid into the seat across from him. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked, his tone low, measured. "I've never been more certain," I said. "I just need to know how much of it is mine." He opened a folder and adjusted his glasses. All of it, he said simply. For a moment, the words didn't register. I blinked. All of it? Daniel nodded. The mansion, the cars, the company shares, everything your husband operates under was built using the capital your father invested at the start. Legally, the business is filed under your trust. Your husband's name doesn't appear on the controlling documents. Not once. A small cold smile tugged at my lips. He doesn't know, does he? Daniel shook his head. From what I can tell, he assumed your father's contribution was a gift. You never told him otherwise. No, I murmured. I didn't. He liked to think he'd built everything himself, from the ground up. I let him. I leaned back, staring out the window. The rain had started again, streaking the glass with quiet lines. I remembered those early years, when Adam had nothing but ideas and a desperate kind of charm. He'd borrowed my father's faith in him like a crutch, and I'd believed in his dream because I believed in us. Somewhere along the way, that dream had become his empire, and I'd become its ghost. Daniel slid a few documents across the table, titles, deeds, partnership agreements. My name gleamed on every line. You have absolute authority, he said. If you choose to act, I can initiate transfer of control within 48 hours. He won't see it coming. I traced my finger over the signature. My name, written in ink years ago when I still thought loyalty meant silence. Do it quietly, I said. I don't want him humiliated yet. Not until he realizes who he's been sleeping under. Daniel gave a slow nod. I'll prepare everything under sealed filing. You'll remain invisible until the last moment. I looked at him, my voice steady. That's how I've lived for years, Daniel. Invisible. He hesitated. You know, most people in your position would want revenge, publicly. You could ruin him overnight. I smiled faintly. Oh, I will. Just not the way he expects. He closed the folder. You're colder than you look. I met his eyes. I'm just done pretending to be warm. When he left, I sat there for a long time, stirring my untouched coffee. Outside, the street was beginning to clear, commuters rushing past, umbrellas like dark flowers in the drizzle. My reflection in the window looked composed, maybe even peaceful. But inside, I felt something shifting. Not rage, not grief, but control. For years, Adam had treated my love like oxygen, invisible, essential, and always available. He'd built his empire on the quiet assumption that I would never leave, never fight, never see what he'd turned me into. He was wrong. I took out my phone and opened our shared company account. The logo he loved so much, a golden phoenix, glowed on the screen. It was ironic, really. He thought he was the one who'd risen from ashes. But the ashes were mine. I transferred a few key permissions into a private holding entity, silent, untraceable. A small step, almost ceremonial. The first domino. As I left the cafe, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled like something new. Freedom, maybe, or just the beginning of the end. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim pretending to be whole. I felt like the architect of something far more precise, the quiet unmaking of the man who'd built his world on my foundation. He thought I'd forgotten my passport. He had no idea I'd remembered everything else. When I told Adam I was taking a solo trip to clear my head, he barely looked up from his phone. You deserve it, he said, pretending to sound affectionate, his hand grazing my shoulder like an actor hitting his mark. I smiled, practiced, patient. I'll be gone a week, I replied. Try not to burn the place down. He chuckled, that easy charm still so convincing. I wanted to hate how familiar it sounded. That evening, I packed my suitcase like any other dutiful wife. Dresses, toiletries, a few books I had no intention of reading. I even took a photo at the airport, a blurry shot of the departure gate, and texted it to him with a little heart emoji. He replied instantly, "Safe flight, babe, except I never boarded the plane." Instead, I took a cab across town to a small apartment I'd rented under my maiden name. It was nothing like our mansion. Plain walls, creaky floors, one window facing a narrow alley. But it was safe, quiet, hidden. I set up my laptop on the kitchen counter and logged into the home's security system. Adam had insisted on top-tier surveillance for protection. He never realized who he was really protecting me from. Every room, every angle, every secret, all streaming live in front of me. For the first day, nothing happened. He stayed out late, probably working. On the second, he came home early, and he wasn't alone. She walked in behind him, wearing the same perfume I'd once loved. The interior designer, my so-called friend. I watched her trail her fingers across the marble counter she'd chosen for us, laughing like she belonged there. He opened a bottle of wine, the expensive one I'd been saving for our anniversary. I didn't cry. Not once, I just watched. He gave her a tour, my kitchen, my library, our bedroom. At one point, she paused to look at a photo on the wall. Me and Adam on our wedding day, smiling like fools. He took it down and placed it face down on the dresser. I remember whispering to myself, "Good, leave it there. It'll be the first thing I flip over when you're gone." Over the next few days, they moved through the house like it was theirs. She brought clothes, shoes, even skincare bottles that lined my bathroom sink. Adam cooked for her once, or tried to, burning the omelet so badly they both laughed until they cried. I recorded everything. Every kiss, every careless laugh, every lie that bloomed in the silence. There was a strange peace in watching them. It was like observing ghosts, the remnants of a life I no longer wanted to inhabit. Every moment stripped away the illusion that my marriage had been anything more than performance. But beneath that calm was strategy. Each video clip was labeled and saved. I organized them chronologically, with timestamps and descriptions. Not because I wanted to expose him immediately. No, this wasn't about scandal. It was about proof. Leverage. On the fourth night, something shifted. I saw him pacing in the study, his phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't smiling. "I told you to stay quiet," he said, voice sharp. "You're not her. You don't get to make decisions." She stood near the doorway, arms crossed. "I'm not living like a secret anymore," she snapped. "You said she'd be gone for good." Gone for good. I paused the video and stared at his face. That same confident arrogance I'd once mistaken for strength. He had no idea how temporary his control really was. By the fifth day, they'd grown careless. She answered calls in the living room, using pet names that would have embarrassed me once. He worked from home, taking business meetings in the same space where we'd built everything together. I watched it all, until I didn't feel anything anymore. No anger, no sorrow, just clarity. On the seventh morning, as sunlight spilled through the blinds of my rented apartment, I made myself coffee and opened a new document. A checklist. Step 1, finalize corporate transfers. Step 2, reassign bank access. Step 3, freeze joint accounts. I looked back at the live feed one last time. She was wearing one of my silk robes, twirling in front of the mirror. He sat on the bed behind her, scrolling his phone, utterly unaware. They thought they were alone in that house. They thought I was somewhere far away, licking my wounds and pretending to move on. I smiled and closed the laptop. My vacation had only just begun, not to escape, but to prepare. Because when I came back, I wouldn't just be returning home. I'd be reclaiming everything he stole, and making sure the next time he looked around that mansion, he'd see nothing left of himself in it. I hadn't stepped foot in that house for weeks. Watching it through the security cameras had been one thing, detached, safe, almost clinical. But walking back into the life I'd built, into the scene of my own undoing, felt like stepping into a theater I no longer recognized. Every polished marble surface, every chandelier, every framed memory was now just a prop for my final act. The invitation had come through our mutual friend, one of those overly cheerful texts that pretends to be casual. Adam's hosting a mod dinner to celebrate some big family news. You should come. It would mean a lot to him. Of course he didn't send it himself. He probably assumed I'd ignore it. He wasn't wrong to think that, at least not before. But I'd been waiting for this exact kind of opportunity. Public, ceremonial, perfectly staged. That night, I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, his parents, his business partners, even a few people I barely tolerated during our marriage. I parked calmly, stepping out in a black dress that fit like armor. I'd chosen it carefully. Elegant but severe. The kind of dress that announced power before a word was spoken. Through the window I saw them already seated. He stood at the head of the table, wineglass raised, mid-speech. The laughter was light, brittle, artificial. She was there too, the interior designer, sitting just to his left, as if she'd already replaced me in every visible way. I could almost laugh at the symbolism. When I opened the front door, conversation died instantly. The room fell silent in waves, forks froze, eyes widened. Adam's glass hovered mid-air. For a moment, he didn't even blink. Then, forcing a grin, he said, "Darling, you made it." I let the word darling hang in the air, tasting the falseness of it. "Of course," I said softly, walking toward the table. I wouldn't miss such an important evening. No one knew what to say. I could feel their confusion flickering between discomfort and curiosity. I smiled at each guest, like the perfect hostess I'd once been. Then I turned to Adam and added, "I heard you have some future plans to announce. I thought I'd come to share a few of my own." His jaw tightened. I could see the panic bloom behind his composure. He gestured stiffly toward the empty chair beside him. "Please sit. Let's not make a scene." I sat. Calmly, deliberately. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, folding my napkin with slow precision. The dinner resumed awkwardly, plates shifting, cutlery scraping, conversation forced. He launched into his speech again, talking about expanding his company, moving investments, restructuring assets. He spoke like a man already certain of his legacy. And then, as if to crown the performance, he raised his glass toward me. None of this would have been possible without my amazing wife. Wife. The irony nearly made me laugh. I rose slowly, keeping my glass in hand. "You're absolutely right," I said. "In fact, since we're all here, it's the perfect time to make something official." He blinked, confused. "Official?" "Yes," I continued, smiling for the guests. "As of this morning, the ownership of the mansion has been transferred. The sale finalizes next week." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that hums with disbelief. His mother's fork clattered to her plate. His business partner frowned. The mistress turned pale. Adam laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You're joking." I tilted my head. "No, darling, I'm done joking. I've also frozen all joint accounts. You'll find your business cards and credit lines temporarily inactive." He stood abruptly. "You can't do that." "Oh, but I can," I said softly, turning to the others. "You see, this home, every wall, every tile, even the company he loves to boast about, it's all in my name, always has been. My father's early investment gave me full ownership. Adam's been operating. Under my roof." A murmur rippled through the table. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. I could see his world cracking, piece by piece, right there in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. He looked at me, eyes wild now. "You set me up." "No," I said evenly. "You set yourself up. I just watched." The mistress tried to speak, but I turned my gaze on her, unflinching. "You might want to start packing your things," I told her. "New owners don't tend to keep ghosts of the past." Her face drained of color. She stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble was the only thing in the room that moved. Adam sat down slowly, shoulders slumped, a man trying to salvage dignity from ashes. "So what now?" he whispered. I looked at him. Really looked. For the first time since the day I'd caught him upstairs. "Now?" I said. "Now you get to live the way you made me live. Watching everything you built slip through your fingers, powerless to stop it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then I raised my glass once more, the faintest smile touching my lips. "To new beginnings," I said, and drank. The guests began murmuring excuses, collecting their things, desperate to leave the tension behind. Within minutes, the dining room emptied, leaving only Adam and me in the wreckage of our once perfect life. He stared at the untouched plates, voice low. "You really planned this?" "Yes," I said, rising from my chair. "From the moment I forgot my passport." And with that, I turned and walked out, heels echoing through the hollow corridors, leaving behind the echo of everything he'd lost. The morning after the dinner, the mansion looked stripped of illusion, as if truth itself had peeled the paint off the walls. I woke early, made coffee in the guest house, and watched the sunrise spill across the property one last time. My phone buzzed before I could take a sip. "Adam." The message was short. "We need to talk. Now." For a moment I almost laughed. After all his silence, all his deceit, he finally wanted to talk. I told him I'd meet him at the house later that afternoon. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already invited a few guests of my own. His family, our mutual friends, and 2 business partners who'd invested heavily in his company. By 5 o'clock, the mansion was full again. But this time, the air felt colder, quieter, like everyone sensed a storm brewing, but couldn't tell where it would strike. Adam stood near the fireplace, trying to look composed, though his tie was loose and his eyes carried that hunted shine. When I entered, conversations died down. He turned to me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "So this is how you celebrate our little misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding," I echoed softly, setting my bag on the table. "Is that what we're calling betrayal now?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You made a fool of me in front of everyone last night. If you think I'll let you walk away with everything, you're mistaken. I've got leverage too. You're not as clean as you think, sweetheart." The word sweetheart landed like poison. I met his gaze steadily. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," he said, leaning in. "You might have sold the house, but I've already moved money. Assets you'll never touch. I've covered every trace." The corner of my mouth lifted. "Oh, I know." He blinked, thrown off. "What do you mean, you know?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a small device, a portable speaker, black and unassuming, the kind used in board meetings and interviews. I pressed play. At first, just silence. Then his voice, unmistakable. "I told you to move the money before she notices. She doesn't need to know what's offshore. The accounts are in my name now." The room went utterly still. Adam froze, color draining from his face. Where did you get that?" I tilted my head slightly. "The study camera. You insisted on security, remember? For our protection. I backed up everything before I left." I clicked again. This time, laughter, his and hers. The mistress's voice purred through the speakers. "She's so gullible, Adam. She still thinks you're loyal." "Don't worry," he replied. "Once the money's settled, I'll tell her it's over. She'll be too embarrassed to fight." The crowd gasped, a symphony of shock, whispers, and disgust. His mother covered her mouth. One of his business partners muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "Jesus Christ!" Adam lunged forward, hand outstretched to grab the speaker, but I stepped back easily. "Careful," I said, voice low but cutting. "Everything you're hearing is already backed up. Multiple copies. Sent to the lawyer, to the bank, to the media outlets that love a scandal involving offshore fraud. He froze mid-step, rage and panic twisting across his face like warring masks. "You wouldn't," he said. I smiled faintly. "You built your castle on sand," I said softly. I just turned off the tide. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then someone, his father, I think, stood up from the sofa and muttered, "I think that's enough." Guests began moving toward the door, whispering, avoiding eye contact with Adam. The mistress, pale, trembling, slipped out through the back like smoke. He stood there, cornered and shaking, as his world disintegrated piece by piece. The man who'd strutted through life so confidently now looked small, reduced. "You ruined me," he said finally, voice cracking. I met his eyes. "No, you ruined us. I just refused to go down with you." I turned off the speaker, slipped it into my bag, and walked toward the door. But before I left, I paused, not out of hesitation, but closure. "You once told me everything we had was because of you," I said quietly. "But now, standing here, it's clear. Everything we had ended because of you, too." And with that, I walked out. Outside, the evening air felt different, clean, weightless. I could hear muffled shouting from inside, the frantic scuffle of damage control beginning. But I didn't look back. As I stepped into my car, I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm, steady, free. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back at me. Not a wife, not a victim, just someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for surviving. The gates of the mansion closed behind me with a soft, final click, like a chapter sealing itself shut. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about reclaiming the version of myself he tried to erase. He'd spent years building a life on lies. I'd spent months preparing for truth. And in the end, truth was the one thing he couldn't afford. It didn't happen overnight, though from the outside, it might have looked that way. One day, Adam was the man with the mansion, the wife, the company, and the polished reputation that made people lean in when he spoke. The next, he was a headline, his name attached to words like fraud, embezzlement, and domestic scandal. But for me, it wasn't sudden at all. It was simply gravity catching up with him. Everything he'd built on deception was finally collapsing under its own weight. The first crack came 2 days after the unveiling. His investors froze funding. Someone leaked snippets of the recordings to the press, not the full files, just enough to stain him beyond repair. The board demanded an emergency audit. Within a week, the auditors uncovered more than I had anticipated. Shell companies, hidden accounts, and falsified invoices signed under his name. He tried to deny it, of course. He always did. "They're twisting everything," he told the cameras as he left his office for the last time, his tie loose, his face hollow. "It's a misunderstanding." But his voice shook. Even he didn't believe himself anymore. His mistress left soon after. Or perhaps she was never really with him to begin with. I saw the news photos. Her stepping out of a black car, suitcase in hand, refusing to comment. Someone in the comments section wrote, "She looks relieved." When I read that, I almost smiled. His family distanced themselves next. His parents, who once looked down on me as the quiet girl from nowhere, released a public statement expressing deep disappointment and no further involvement in his business affairs. I didn't feel vindicated hearing. It just finished, then came the house, or what was left of it. The sale finalized within the month. I didn't return for the closing. My lawyer handled everything. Adam tried to buy time, to delay, to claim sentimental ownership, but sentiment doesn't outweigh signed deeds. I let the silence speak for me. He moved into a small rented apartment downtown. The tabloids described it as modest. I'd call it fitting. The same man who once mocked me for buying off-brand groceries now lived with second-hand furniture and flickering light bulbs. His car was repossessed. His account seized pending investigation. And me? I kept quiet. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't gloat online. I simply let the story tell itself, because it wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever believed in a man like him. Late one evening, I passed by the cafe where I'd once met my lawyer. Through the window, I saw Adam sitting alone at a corner table. He didn't see me. He looked smaller, thinner, a man hollowed out by his own reflection. A disposable coffee cup sat in front of him, and he stared at it as if trying to remember what warmth used to feel like. For a second, my heart softened. Old habits of empathy are hard to kill. But then I remembered the version of myself that used to sit in that same spot, waiting for him to come home, making excuses for his cruelty. That woman was gone now, and so was the illusion of the man she'd loved. People sometimes ask if revenge felt sweet. I don't know if sweet is the right word. It wasn't pleasure I felt watching his world disintegrate. It was clarity. Pure, unshakable clarity. I hadn't destroyed him. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply stopped protecting him from himself. When you spend your life covering for someone's lies, you start to forget that lies require constant feeding. The moment you stop, they starve. And that's exactly what happened. Not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, inevitable suffocation. His friends stopped returning calls. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. And eventually, even the gossip faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresher tragedies. That's when I knew it was over. Not because he'd fallen, but because I no longer cared to watch. I remember standing on the balcony of my new apartment weeks later, feeling the cool wind against my skin, the city lights flickering like silent witnesses. Somewhere out there, he was probably nursing resentment, rewriting the story in his head to make himself the victim. But truth doesn't bend for pride. It just waits, patient, merciless, honest. In the end, he lost everything. Money, reputation, comfort. But what truly broke him wasn't the fall itself. It was realizing no one wanted to catch him. And me? I finally understood that justice doesn't always come with noise or applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of peace, in the stillness of knowing you no longer owe someone your silence. I didn't destroy him, I whispered to the night, letting the words drift into the wind. I let his truth do that. And for the first time in years, that truth felt like freedom. The mansion looked different without the furniture. Echoes replaced laughter, and sunlight spilled across bare marble floors like something foreign, almost intrusive. For the first time in years, I could hear the house breathe. Creaks, drafts, the faint hum of emptiness. I walked slowly through the foyer, the soles of my shoes tapping against the stone. Each sound lingered too long, as if the walls were reluctant to let go. The chandelier above me still hung in perfect symmetry, a monument to what I once thought was elegance. I remembered the day it was installed. Adam had insisted on it, saying, "Every queen needs a crown." I suppose that made this house his idea of a kingdom. Now it was just an empty shell. I paused at the base of the grand staircase. The railings gleamed faintly, polished by years of my hands trailing along them. I could almost see my younger self there. 27, nervous, holding blueprints and dreams, believing love could be built like architecture. If the foundation was strong, the rest would hold. But I hadn't realized how easily people can rot the foundation from within. Halfway up the stairs, a faint memory pulled me back. Our wedding reception, the laughter of friends echoing from these very walls, the air thick with champagne and promise. Adam had lifted me in his arms, spinning me at the foot of the staircase while our guests cheered. I remember thinking, we made it. Now standing there, I could almost hear that same laughter, hollow, ghostly, repeating itself from somewhere deep in the past. I moved from room to room. The dining hall, still smelling faintly of old wood polish and forgotten dinners. The library, where dust had settled over the empty shelves like snow. And finally, the bedroom. The curtains swayed in the breeze, revealing the garden outside. That room had seen everything, every lie, every silence, every moment of pretending. I stood at the doorway, unsure whether to step inside. But I did. I owed myself that much. The bed was gone, the dresser too. Only faint outlines on the carpet showed where things used to be. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, the room came alive again. Laughter, whispers, sunlight on our faces, mornings that smelled like coffee and new beginnings. Then I saw her. Not in reality, but in memory. The other woman, standing by that same window, adjusting the curtains, her laughter mixing with his. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, like watching a film I'd already seen too many times to care about the ending. I walked to the vanity, mine once, and ran my fingers across the bare surface. "You took everything," I whispered, not to him, but to the version of myself that had believed she couldn't survive without this life. And then I corrected myself softly. No, I gave everything. I turned and walked toward the hallway. The air shifted behind me, cooler, lighter. It felt like the house was exhaling. Or maybe I was. Downstairs, the realtor waited by the door, clipboard in hand. She smiled politely, not knowing the history that lingered in every shadow here. "Ready?" she asked. "Almost," I said. Before leaving, I stepped into the kitchen one last time. The window above the sink framed the backyard perfectly. The garden we'd once planted together. It had grown wild now, vines climbing over the fence, roses blooming without pruning. Somehow it looked more alive than it ever had under our care. I smiled at that, at nature's quiet defiance. Things grow again when they're left alone. I took one last walk through the hallway, running my fingertips across the walls, feeling the texture of paint and time. So many versions of me had lived here. The hopeful bride, the business partner, the silent wife, the broken woman. But as I reached the front door, I realized none of them remained. All that was left was someone new. Someone unburdened. Outside, the sky was a gentle gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I handed the keys to the realtor. The metallic clink echoed like a final punctuation mark. She thanked me, offered a polite nod, and walked toward her car. But I stayed a moment longer, looking back at the house, its tall windows, its manicured facade, its illusion of permanence. "This place was never haunted," I murmured. It was just full of memories that overstayed their welcome. For a long moment, I stood there. Not mourning, not nostalgic, just still. Then I whispered the words that had been waiting inside me for months. I built this place, and now I'm free from it. As I turned away, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the dust from the driveway. Behind me, the mansion stood silent, a monument to everything I had survived. And ahead of me, the road stretched open. Airports have a strange smell, something between new beginnings and old exhaustion. The hum of rolling suitcases, the distant chatter over intercoms, the faint scent of coffee and disinfectant, it all felt too familiar. Except this time it didn't feel rushed. It felt right. I stood in line at the check-in counter, passport in hand. The same navy blue cover that once sent me spiraling into the darkest chapter of my life now sat steady in my fingers. I traced the embossed emblem with my thumb, feeling its weight, not as an object, but as a symbol. Last time I forgot it, I discovered who my husband truly was. This time I remembered who I truly am. The line moved forward, slow and steady. I wasn't late anymore. I wasn't running anymore. When I handed over my passport, the agent smiled. "Business or leisure?" she asked. "Freedom," I said, and we both laughed, though only one of us knew how deeply I meant it. As I walked through security, the soft buzz of machines and the shuffle of feet surrounded me. I remembered the first trip I'd tried to take, the frantic panic, the calls he never answered, the dread that turned my car around. That day had started like any other, but it ended with the death of a version of me that I no longer mourned. It's strange, how something as small as forgetting can unravel everything. A single misplaced item, a few minutes lost, and suddenly life splits in two. The woman who made it to her flight, and the woman who didn't. I became the latter, and she became free. Now, walking through the same terminal, I noticed details I hadn't before. the child tugging at his mother's sleeve, the old couple holding hands, the businessman whispering into his phone. Everyone here was leaving something behind. Everyone was running toward something new. I reached the gate early and sat by the window. Planes taxied across the runway, white wings gleaming beneath the morning sun. The glass reflected my face, older now, calmer but not hardened, just awake. I thought about how, not long ago, I'd sat in an airport parking lot, numb and hollow, unable to move forward or back. I'd watched people rushing to board their flights while I couldn't even breathe. Back then, I thought my life had ended. Now I realized it had only just begun. The announcement came through the speakers. My flight, finally boarding. I stood up, slipped my bag over my shoulder, and took one last look out the window. The sky stretched open, endless, forgiving. As I walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the engines grew louder, vibrating through the metal beneath my feet. It felt like a heartbeat, like something alive urging me forward. I found my seat by the window, buckled in, and placed my passport on my lap. The flight attendant smiled, asking if I needed anything. I shook my head, smiling back. "No," I said softly. "I have everything I need." The plane began to move, slow at first, then faster, gathering speed, lifting from the ground. I watched as the city shrank below me, the grid of streets, the specks of cars, the faint outline of the world I once built and burned down. Somewhere down there was the mansion, the memories, the ghosts of promises that never lasted. But none of it hurt anymore. It simply existed. Like chapters of a book I had already finished reading. I rested my head against the window, feeling the hum of ascent beneath my skin. The clouds rose to meet us, soft and endless. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, forgetting leads you to everything you were meant to remember. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Not because I was leaving something behind, but because I was finally, fully, going somewhere new. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no warning. Just my name, typed neatly in the center. I almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail. But something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped with a court seal. Adam's name, bankruptcy notice. For a long moment, I just stared at it. No smile, no satisfaction. Just a slow, quiet exhale. The man who once bragged about building an empire was now reduced to paperwork. Debts, losses, liquidations. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was stillness. A strange, heavy calm that came from knowing the storm had passed. And I was no longer standing in the rain. He had always needed noise, applause, validation. I had learned to live in silence. And now, that silence was my victory. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. Then I returned to my desk, where invoices and plans from my new venture waited. It wasn't glamorous. A small design consultancy, focused on helping women rebuild their businesses after divorce or loss. It started with one client, then 3. Now months later, I had a waiting list. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years helping Adam craft the illusion of success. Now, I built something real, quietly, steadily, for myself. Every month, I set aside a portion of my profits for a women's legal fund. It wasn't charity, it was closure. For every woman who'd been silenced, dismissed, or trapped by loyalty, I wanted to offer a door out, a chance to start again, without begging for permission. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still think about the mansion. The empty halls, the echo of my own footsteps as I walked away. But even those memories had softened, like distant waves brushing the shore. They no longer hurt. They just existed, proof of where I'd been, not where I was going. A friend once asked me if I ever regretted not confronting Adam the day I caught him. I told her no. The truth is, revenge doesn't always come in shouting matches or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in quiet signatures, in calm exits, in the way you rebuild your life without the people who tried to break it. I used to believe justice had to be loud, that it needed to be seen, felt, acknowledged. But real justice, I've learned, is silent. It's peace. It's waking up one morning, realizing you don't think about them anymore. I stood by my window, sunlight spilling across the floor, the city alive beneath me. Somewhere, Adam was learning how to live without power. I didn't need to watch. I didn't need to celebrate, because I already had what he never would: peace, purpose, and the kind of strength that never needed witnesses. Revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own peace.